Silverstone leaves it all but done in the Drivers' Title Championship, but we see a drive for the ages from Tom and Ash. This is the Silverstone review.
Hello and welcome back to the British Touring Car Podcast. You join us once again to go through the penultimate round of the season at Silverstone this time out. I was on the sofa this weekend, but Russ, you were there, weren't you? How did you find it?
I got the Valvoline hat. I'm very happy. I'm very happy. It's a very nice hat. Just bear with me 1 minute while I just give a quick 180 to the camera of the hat, because it is limited edition and the highlight of the season in many ways.
It is very nice, isn't it?
As caps go, that's
Dare I
not bad.
say, it would suit a BMW down to the ground, wouldn't it?
It would, and it's it's in BMW colours to a degree, but yeah, it's a very nice hat, very comfortable, and I'm very happy with my purchase. I got there nice and early, made a beeline when I got there to the Napa stand, and was pleasantly surprised to see they had some left over.
Or even a V-line.
Very good, very good. Very good. I like it.
Thank you. That's the only good bit you're getting.
All season.
So, yeah, obviously you were there this weekend. I kept everyone up to date. And it was an interesting weekend. Plenty of action. And a surprise on Saturday.
Yeah, I'll get through to my experience of Silverstone as a fan later on in the podcast. We'll dive straight into the weekend's action. Obviously, it was a two-part qualifying session this time out with the top 10 shootout. To be honest with you, I'm going to just sort of shoot through who was in there and who wasn't, because not a great deal happened in qualifying. No red flags, no real incidents, to be perfectly honest with you.
What, you mean Halstead didn't go off?
No. Well, if he did, he didn't cause a red flag. Well, if he did, he didn't cause a red flag. So, yeah, no real problems. I suppose the only thing to mention is that in Q1, if you like, a couple of black flags came out for Bobby Thompson and for Ricky Collard for track limit infringements. The only corner it was being policed at was Copse. Make of that what you will in terms of how legitimate this stupid track limits thing has been. I can't get my head around how you only pick one corner. But we've discussed that in the past. We won't go into that today.
I think you said that there were two judges at Copse, weren't there? One from one direction, one from the other, just to make sure that they were right on that corner.
And to be fair, that Copse is a corner where you can really push the track limits because you can run out wide and carry a lot of speed. But then my other thought on that is that just pressure pad it then. Just pressure pad it. This is the national circuit of the UK. But anyway, in the top 10 who got through into round number 2, Jake Hill took pole in that session. Aaron Taylor-Smith second by 0.004 of a second. Tom Ingram, Colin Turkington, Mikey Doble, Sam Osborne, Rory Butcher, Dan Camish, Tom Chilton and Ash Sutton only just getting into the top 10, and wouldn't have done so if Dan Rowbottom hadn't been asked to sacrifice his final lap because he was going quick enough to knock Sutton out of that top 10. He had to abort his lap. I suppose the big casualties, if you like, there's some big names that didn't get through in dry conditions. Adam Morgan missed out. Obviously, Dan Rowbottom, as I mentioned. Josh Cook, Ricky Collard, Stephen Jelly. Names you might expect to have got through, but didn't. Obviously, we had Bobby Thompson returning this weekend, and he got his Cupra up to 18th, the best of the hards. I think that speaks volumes about how good a driver Thompson is and why hard are a worse team without him, or have been a worse team without him. Moving into the top 10 shootout, again, nothing really happened apart from the fact that BMWs went quickest to begin with until the front wheel drives got their cars swapped over. I should actually say Sam Osborne made it into the top 10 from the first session, which is a great effort by him. I might have missed him out as I was reading through the list. So brilliant to see that. And obviously he was in the Valvoline colours this weekend, and that livery looked amazing. I went and saw it in the garage. Boy, oh boy, oh boy, it is a hell of a good livery. I suppose then the biggest surprise in Q2 was that Mikey Doble took pole by 0.012 of a second over Colin Turkington. Mikey Doble was the man to break up the Napa dominance. I don't think anybody had on their prediction cards that it'd be PMR that could stop this Napa lockout, but fair play to Mikey. He pulled out when it mattered. Fair play to PMR, I think, just for the season. We both wrote them off at the start of the season. We both look a bit silly now because they've done wonders this year and they've absolutely smashed hard out of the park. Who is their nearest sort of competitor in a way, because they're both running the same engine. But fantastic effort by PMR and by Doble. His first pole in the touring cars. And Ash Sutton could only qualify fifth. which was behind both Tom Ingram and Jake Hill, who going into the race still had a chance of winning the title, as did mathematically Colin Turkington, who started second. I think that pretty much sums up the qualifying, apart from to say it was Chilton 6th, Cavendish 7th, Taylor Smith 8th, Rory Butcher 9th, and Sam Osborne rounded out that top 10.
I've got a couple of questions for you, first of all, before we move on.
Hit me.
The gaps in that final session were extremely tight in the top, 4 or 5 drivers, weren't they?
The gap in the first session was even tighter. I mean, the whole field was covered by less than a second from first to 27th. And the top 10 was covered. The guy that missed out, Morgan, was 0.15 off. So, the whole of the top 10, I think, was under a second. It was a really tight qualifying session. Not to be unexpected to a degree, because it's such a short circuit, it's difficult to make up time in that way. So I'm not particularly surprised it was such a close session. And as you say, Q2 was also very close. The top, as you say, the whole top 10 or top 9 separated by, I think, well under a second. So, yeah.
My other question was, why was Sam Osborne's time like 3 seconds slower? Did he not get a proper lap in?
Didn't get a proper lap in. No, I didn't get proper lapping. I think that because of tyre allocations and stuff like that, I think they were just happy to. Sam Osborne was guaranteed his best qualifying result of his career just by being in the top 10. So I think they had a half an hour race tomorrow. And I think also, he was there to give Sutton a tow if needs be. Again, they'd sacrifice him if they needed to for Sutton. So and also, I think it's fair to say that Osborne doesn't quite have the pace of everybody else. He did well to get in the top 10, but as we saw on the Sunday, I think he just lacks that killer lap.
I just thought 3 and a bit seconds off in that or shootout session was a bit more than we're used to for a gap back to 10th.
We sometimes see it in F1, don't we? If Haas make Q3, they don't go out because they're happy that the lowest they'll start is 10th, and they don't want to risk the car or something like that. So you can understand it.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Shall we move on to the races then, mate?
Please do. And you obviously roles reverse this week. You're doing races 1 and 3. So somehow I still managed with the biggest bloody job.
Although there was plenty of entertainment just as race 1 went to start on that Sunday morning. So when you got to the track in the morning, was it wet or dry?
Wet.
Wet when you got to the track. You had a little bit of rain in the morning as well.
It was really weird.
Started to dry, didn't it?
Yeah, it was really weird rain. It was like a mist, so it wasn't heavy, but it was a really, really wet mist. It wasn't big drops or anything like that. It was just really wet, cold, misty rain, and obviously the wind was bringing that across the track. So when we got to the grandstand for race number 1, as they came to the grid, it was cold but dry, but the track was still damp because obviously it hadn't dried out from the morning. And then on the lap to the grid, it began to rain a little bit, and they had 2 laps to the grid.
Okay. So going into that then, the drivers had to make the decision whether to go onto the wet or dry tyre, and there was a big split on this. So on the front row, Doble, also Ingram, Turkington, Sutton were all on dry tyres. The key drivers that were on wet tyres, though, were Hill from, I think, 4th or 5th on the grid.
Can I just make a point about Hill? That he came to the grid on dries.
Oh, okay. So he changed. Made the decision to change.
Yeah, he was the only BMW that came to the grid on dries. Everyone else, all other BMWs came to the grid on wets and then swapped to dries, and Hill did it the other way around.
How much do you think Hill made the change because he saw that Ingram and Sutton were on dry tyres, though?
I think he made the change because he saw Colin Turkington slide round Luffield on the formation lap on dry tyres. On wet tyres.
To the grid.
Yeah, laps to the grid, sorry.
Yeah.
And saw him slide on the laps to the grid on wets and decide that it was probably a wet race. I think Hill also mentioned afterwards in his interview that the track was wet, it was cold, it weren't going to dry quickly, and therefore wets were probably the best idea, and rain was in the air. So I'm actually amazed that anybody started the race on dries, if I'm honest with you. I'm shocked because to my eye in the grandstands, it was a greasy track, and rain was in the air. It was not like it was sunny or anything like that. I'm amazed. Particularly people like Sutton and Ingram started on dries. I'm stunned by that. But
certainly from the TV pictures that I saw, I thought it's a 50-50 decision on whether to go on those dry tyres, whether to go on the wet tyres, because although the clouds were grey and dark, you're not necessarily going to get that going to get rain from them, it may be a case of after a few laps, once you've got 26, 27 cars circulating on track, that you begin to get that dry line. But once they set off on that formation lap, you saw the rain and the mist start to come in, and it gradually got worse and worse, which is why a lot of the drivers actually came in at the end of the formation lap to change onto the wet tyres.
Yeah.
So, go on.
I was going to say, I'm surprised that more people didn't start on the wets, as I say, because the track was never going to dry within the 20 laps. Yes, as you say, a dry line would appear and did appear towards the end of the race, but yeah, I'm surprised.
So, most importantly, then, Hill and Osborne were, I think, the only two drivers in the top 10 that started on the wet tyre, as did Morgan, Watson, and Thompson, who were just outside the top 10. And we would still see those drivers make an excellent start, but not before a small mishap where Mikey Doble, pole sitter, wasn't informed that it was only going to be one formation or one green flag lap.
Yeah, so as I said previously, they had 2 laps to the grid, and because it was a wet race, or because it was wet, when they set off it was dry, they were due to have 2 formation laps like you normally do in the wet. However, because it wasn't raining at that point, they decided having it as one, and for some reason, Dobble wasn't told.
Yeah. So yeah, as you said, in qualifying the last time they were out on the circuit, basically it was dry and the conditions had changed. They were meant to have the 2 laps, and there is a little bit of confusion around that. I don't know whether it would be better to just do 2 anyway, if that was what was planned. But yeah, Doble went off for a second formation lap, leaving everyone else on the grid.
I'll tell you what was interesting as well, as I was following this online, somebody asked, well, where's the marshal with the flag? Because normally but they're not allowed to do it anymore.
No.
I didn't know that. That was news to me, because obviously growing up, you had the marshal holding the flag in P1 and 2. But I didn't realise that had changed. Is that a recent change, or?
I'm not sure how recent that is, but I'd probably subconsciously noticed that they weren't doing it anymore. I hadn't thought of it as much of a big thing, but yeah, certainly coming down to an incident like this makes a real big change, and it was really unfortunate that Dobble was the one to unfortunately come across that.
I would say it wouldn't have made a difference anyway, because he was on dry tyres, so he was going to fall back anyway. So
He was going to fall back anyway,
some
and
consolation.
he did stay on the dry tyres for the whole race, and towards the end of the race did help him fight back through the field. But as the lights went out, Hill, unsurprisingly, on those wet tyres with the rear wheel drive, got the best start. Go on.
Just on Dobble, I'm amazed he didn't get a penalty, because he wasn't. I don't think he was still when the start started, because I don't think
He was what I didn't quite understand is, one, he was still rolling around to the grid doing his second formation lap, but there was a green flag at the back of the grid.
Yeah.
So obviously they can't see the front of the grid from there and whether every car is in line. They just give the green flag for when the last driver is in line. So that's the only car that they're looking for. So the fact that there hadn't been calls from the marshal post saying there's a car going round again, I don't know what the communication was like there.
No, and to be fair, it's a bizarre situation. It's not one you
It
would
is.
particularly expect. But yeah, I'm surprised. I'm glad he didn't get a penalty, because this clearly come down to a miscommunication. But yeah, he was certainly not still on the grid when they set off.
No, certainly wasn't. So as the drivers set off, all those wet shot drivers were pushing their way through all the dry tyre runners as the rain was starting to fall. As I said, many cars were into the pits as well on that formation lap, swapping over to the wet tyres, realising the mistake that they'd made and trying to rectify that as quickly as possible. Ingram did the best to hold on the slicks for a good 3 or 4 laps. Him and Sutton more or less keeping pace with each other. So like almost mirrored each other for the whole weekend, didn't they?
Yeah, I mean, Ingram knew he had to stick to Sutton like glue this weekend, because ultimately he didn't achieve it, but as we'll get to in the other 2 races, he didn't outscore him enough, in my opinion. But it wasn't for the lack of trying, put it that way.
No, it certainly wasn't. Turkington succumbed to the same incident that put him out at Silverstone last year.
Mirror image.
It was coming down to Luffield, was spun out there, obviously on the wrong tyre, which didn't help. But it was very much the same incident that happened last year, where 3 into 1 definitely didn't go. Although Ingram was holding on, going down into Beckett's, I think on lap 3 or 4, He got a nudge in the rear from Crease, who had made that early switch to the wet tyre, and had completely different braking points. Basically, misjudged the braking of how early Ingram was going to brake. Managed to run into the back of him, which sent Ingram for a spin. There was, as far as I'm aware, no penalty for this because of the difference in tyres and the conditions that were going on. And
Remarkably, there was no penalties at all in race one.
wow. And so therefore on lap 4, Sutton and Ingram both came into the pit. And by about lap 6, it all settled down with drivers getting onto the tyre that they wanted to stay on for the rest of the race, be that struggling through on that slick tyre or having made that change to the wet tyre. With Hill followed by Watson, followed by Rowbottom, Osborne, Thompson, and Morgan. I must say, I'm surprised Morgan didn't make more of this race than he did, especially at the start. Yes, he made up a few places, and we also know how good Watson is in these sort of conditions. But I would have expected him to have been running in front of Thompson, Osborne, and probably Rowbottom.
I think I agree. However, BMWs in the wet don't work generally. Jake Hill is an exception to the rule, and he always has been.
Yeah,
Added to that, you don't know whether Rowbottom was running a dry setup with wet tyres.
yeah,
That's something to bear in mind as well. Is that what setups did they come to the grid on, and how much could they
yeah.
change on the grid? I don't know how much they could change on the grid. To be honest with you, I'm not sure how quick it can be done. What I will say is that it was interesting commentary from Tim Harvey, who's been quite interesting in the last few weeks. It's been quite
Mm.
strange, but they're looking for the sounds of it to bring in a different size roller next year for wet races to try and
Yeah,
stop having these. Not that it affected anybody this weekend, but having a different size roller, because I think it has to be accepted that cars coming to the grid on the dry setup and having to change to wet haven't got time to go for the full setup change, and
yeah.
therefore that could affect the ride height because the tyres are smaller on they're smaller
Smaller
or
in
bigger,
diameter,
smaller.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then
So
obviously they'll wear down even more with wearing out those tread blocks on those wet tyres.
even more so if the race starts becoming dry and they start
Yeah,
overheating. So
yeah.
I think that's a sensible move, and fair play to Toker and Gow if that comes in. I think that's been long overdue.
Yeah, certainly. Camish was one of the drivers that didn't come back out after getting into the pits to try and swap to the wet tyres. He had a diabolical weekend once again. He's run out of any luck that he had this season, and I think he'll just be glad to get through Brands and get to the winter break. Uh, by lap 12, then, Butcher
It
was
hasn't happened at
11th,
Napa
being
for
the
him, has it?
first driver on slicks, and was starting to keep pace with the wet runners that were in front of him and then start to build on that pace as well. Aaron Taylor Smith and Cook just behind him were also on the slick tyres, and Aaron Taylor Smith was making a slight charge, although that did involve what looked like to me a push to pass on Cook at Luffield. There was certainly a nose down the inside. It was a classic touring car move, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's touring cars of old. Push to pass. Yeah, it probably was a push to pass. I'm amazed the penalty wasn't given, but I can't really work out what penalties are given for now in terms of push to pass, because we've seen a couple this year which seem slam dunk and then
Yeah,
haven't been. But
yeah, agreed. And then the real sort of like changeover between that dry versus wet tyre, I think, came when Butcher passed Gamble on the Gamble was on the wet tyre at the time, and they were starting to get the grip, get the temperature back in the tyres, and actually make headway against the wet runners with about 6 laps to go. Meanwhile, Watson and Rowbottom were battling for second in what was a very good battle, very clean as well, and both drivers were positioning the car very well for me.
yeah,
Um,
it was good driving, good racing.
yeah, the Cupras that had stopped early for the wet tyre change of De Leon, Crease, and Lloyd did start falling back past those dry runners of Cook, Butcher, and Taylor Smith. They did well. They stayed within the points just about. Um, yeah, they couldn't do much else. They made that gamble early on. They had nothing to lose, being at the back of the grid basically, and it paid off for all three of them, gaining points at the end of the race.
Absolutely. I think that pretty much sums up race one, to be fair, doesn't it?
Yeah, Rowbottom managed to grab second late on, and more importantly, Collard snatched fastest lap off Ingram first of all, and then Aaron Taylor Smith did it, with Hill taking an easy win. He built up a hell of a gap at the front,
Yeah.
and then did the race over 5 seconds clear, which means for the championship battle, it put Hill up into second, with Ingram third, 41 and 42 points behind, respectively. But to go through the finishing order then, it was Jake Hill from Rowbottom from Watson, Adam Morgan in fourth, followed by Bobby Thompson, Rory Butcher, Aaron Taylor Smith. Sam Osborne did well, he kept his nose clean. Josh Cook in ninth, Dan Lloyd in 10th. Mikey Doble had an
Do you,
excellent recovery. Go on.
do you think Rowbottom did well? Sorry, not Rowbottom. Osborne did well.
I
I'm in
think
two
so,
minds.
because he was on the wet tyre, remember? He started the race on the wet tyre.
Yeah, but he was falling back through the field on the wet tyre. He was being caught and passed by cars around him on the wet tyre. After having that
Yeah,
great start, he just really fell off, and he fell off big time. Thompson, Morgan, Watson, that because they were all on the wet tyre battling together, and
yeah,
Rowbottom for that matter, and he fell off massively towards it. And look, it's good points for him. In eighth is not a bad finish,
yeah.
but don't know. I don't know. Maybe being harsh, but yeah, he was the
The,
only
the only
only.
the only driver that I would have been surprised that got past him, although we know how good Bobby is Bobby. I thought Morgan, as I said at the start, should have been sort of like up challenging Rowbottom and Watson for the podium. Who wasn't.
Should
That top
should
three really got away.
should Watson be getting past him though?
Yeah, I think so. With the pace of that Astra this weekend, in those conditions, we know how good Watson is as well.
I find it funny that he's well, not funny, but obviously Taylor Swift and Butcher both got past him but couldn't catch up to the rest, which I think says a lot for how far back he'd fallen.
Mm,
I don't know. I'm being slightly harsh. I just kind of think that you've got to seize the opportunities you get, and I think the race one was a real opportunity for him to get,
yeah.
if not a podium, at least a top sort of four, top six finish. And again, yeah, it's slightly harsh perhaps, but yeah, he's done well. But he's at.
We don't know how much of the tyre he'd used in the early laps, trying to stay with them, and then coming into the dry end to the race, he was always
Yeah,
going to struggle a little bit more.
yeah, fair enough, fair enough.
Mikey Doble managed to recover to 11th from the back of the grid. Crease finishing in 12th, Chilton 13th, Darrell De Leon getting his first points in 14th, and Gamble in 15th.
That double recovery is phenomenal, by the way. It's gone under the
It is
radar because of what happened
very
at the
well
start,
done.
but that is phenomenal on the wrong tyre and having to stay out on the wrong tyre and take your punishment.
Yeah,
That's a hell of a recovery drive by Mikey.
yeah. If he'd come in and gone for that wet tyre, it would have been a far worse race, and he would have probably finished down near Ingram and Sutton in
Oh,
22nd,
agreed.
23rd.
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
Shall we move on to race 2 then, sir?
Yeah, so race 2 then. If you haven't seen it, then turn us off now and go and find a way to see it. I can't say anything other than that.
And then listen to us afterwards.
Yeah, put us back on afterwards. What I
Yeah,
will say is that race 2 was a classic touring car race in terms of
was.
pushing to passing, bumper to bumper, side door to side door. It was a real throwback, and I'm going to miss stuff out because we could have a 4-hour podcast on this race on its own right. Okay, so there's no agenda, there's no conspiracy. I'm just going to stick with the main talking points because there is so much to say. So Hill got the best start into race number 2. It was a dry race. Hill got off the line well, and behind him it was anybody else for second. We lost Rowbottom. Or he fell out of position because he got caught up in 3 into 1 doesn't go into the complex with Watson and Morgan. It's what happens when you try and go 3 abreast. It doesn't always work out. It's just what it is. This allowed Hill to sort of absolutely scamper away at the front. Alan Taylor Smith had got off the line well and slotted into second behind, where, as I said, everybody else behind was kicking off. They were pushing, bumping, drafting, all those kind of things through the final complex. The amount of times I saw a car get run out wide into the gravel trap, I lost count of. I suppose the next big talking point was Bobby Thompson got turned around by Josh Cook. Josh Cook did the gentleman thing and allowed Thompson to right himself and rejoin in front of him. So fair play to Cook on that one. He got it wrong, and he atoned for it. Further back, Ingram was nearly torpedoed by the submarine bomb that was Jack Butel.
Do
I
you
don't. Gone,
Do you
gone.
remember a couple of seasons ago when we had Smiley happened?
Yeah.
It might now turn into Bootel happened if he does that anymore, because that was just downright reckless.
I don't want to stick the boot in too much, but this was just so poor.
It was.
It wasn't wet, so you can't blame the weather. Yes, there's some concertina going up. You expect that into the complex into the first couple of laps, but he came with so much. It almost looked like he'd forgotten to brake.
The only pass I will give him, and we didn't see any sort of replay to suggest this, is if he got tapped from behind and got
I don't think he did
pushed
because he got.
forwards.
I don't think he did because he got a penalty afterwards,
Okay,
which suggests that he didn't.
yeah,
Um, and the penalty, it's worded. I can't. I've not got the wording to hand,
he
but
got
I'll find.
two penalty points for it though, didn't he?
Yeah, and the wording was interesting. It was along the lines of he's not learned from previous mistakes, which is here we go. I've got it here now.
Okay,
Causing a collision, try again. Causing a collision, repetition of serious mistakes, or the appearance of a lack of control over the car was what he was contravened with.
okay,
He got official reprimand and 2 penalty points and a 3-place grid penalty because that was a strike effectively.
yeah.
Ingram is blooming lucky that he decided that the best person to take out was Patterson and not Ingram because he just speared into the side of Patterson.
Got held up a lot by the instant though, because he was
Oh,
pushed to the outside, wasn't he?
yeah, and had to have a half spin and correct it. Yeah,
Mm.
absolutely. I'm not sure that'll do much wonders for team hard morale at the moment either, having that. But look, I don't want to stick the boot in too much, but it's just a poor mistake. And Bootel is making these regularly and doesn't seem to be improving. Doesn't seem to be as a driver. I mean, look, he's not going to win a race with team hard in that setup, but you don't expect these kind of things. If you compare it to, I haven't seen DeLyon or Patterson make mistakes of a similar level.
Mm. And considering he's been in the sport, what, this is his third or fourth season?
Third or fourth, yeah.
Yeah, it's
He's not a rookie.
it's a rookie error.
Yeah, and he's not a rookie. And you've
No.
seen rookies come in this year and perform much better.
Yes.
And not just over where they're finishing, but over general speed and not having these incidents. But yeah, Ingram very, very lucky to escape from that. But I'm glad he did because then we saw from both Sutton and Ingram just why they are so good and why they are first, second in the championship and why they are, in my mind, the best two by a long way in this championship and
Yep.
up in the greatest of all time conversations as well. Jake Hill was leading the race perfectly fine at the front, and then we had a controversial safety car. And I'm interested on your thoughts. Very interested in your thoughts on this one. So there was some debris as you come onto the straight.
Yep.
Is it Wellington Straight, that bit?
I can't remember. They did a nice zoomed in shot to show that it was a little piece of Napa, I think, front wing, that little bit that sits just behind the front wheel,
Yeah.
with Napa branding on it. And I thought, that's quite ironic that's got Napa branding on it, because it would be perfect if we got a safety car now for Sutton to close, or the field to close up, Sutton to be within touching distance. I think he was, what,
Sixth or seventh, yeah.
sixth or seventh at that point. And then the speed he was going at, he'd have a real shot at getting onto the podium at the very least.
Do you think a safety car should have been called? Do yes or no to begin with, and we'll go into reasons afterwards.
I can see why it was called.
That's not a yes or a no answer. Yes or no?
I would think no, but I don't know what other debris was on track because it was well offline.
Okay, I would say yes.
Okay.
Okay, and it's not just because I like Sutton and I'm wearing my Napa hat. What I would say is that Camish had a puncture around about the same time, and you've got cars going down the straight into speed into a really hard braking zone for the complex.
As did Gamble as well, I think, didn't he?
Yes. So what you're risking by leaving debris on the track is cars reaching the end of the straight, going into the hardest braking zone on the track at speed and getting punctures and causing a problem. So this is where, and I think we both agree on this point, a VSC or a full yellow flag of the circuit makes more sense rather than the safety car. But
what is a little more difficult with Silverstone, due to the size of the circuit and how much the field had spread out by that point, is you have to bring them all into the safety car queue to be able to safely get a marshal out on track to pick up that debris. I don't think a VSC in this scenario would have been the right call because there wouldn't have been enough space and the safety aspect would have been questionable for me.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I can understand that as well. I think a VSC might have worked, but it might take a couple of laps to sort of to get that. But yeah, I think that it seems a bit overkill. However, as Paul O'Neill has said on Twitter, because people are suggesting it's a conspiracy so Sutton could win, there is no conspiracy here. Safety is paramount. It's always been paramount. And as he quite rightly said, if people started to get punctures, everyone would be clutching their pearls, go, why wasn't the safety car called to get rid of the debris? Yeah, so you couldn't win either way.
No.
It does seem a little bit overkill, but what was the other option?
Yeah.
So I think it was right. I can see why Hill was annoyed by it because obviously he built up a big lead, but it's not the safety car's fault that the boost valve on that BMW's been faulty all season and finally decided to let go in a big way here. That's not the safety car's fault. That's BMW's fault.
Yeah, the reliability aspect, and I think I talked about it in the preview, is reliability can start playing havoc, should I say, with the end of a season, and the misfire that he got just meant that his straight line speed absolutely plummeted after that
But
safety car restart.
yeah, because he controlled the restart really well. Because I
Mm.
messaged you and said Taylor Swift is going for this because obviously
Yeah,
they're bunched up, and I thought Taylor Swift had missed his opportunity because Hill lost them through the complex and
he did.
controlled the restart really well.
Yeah,
But then down the straight on this lap after the safety car, to be fair to Aaron Taylor Smith, he didn't know that Hill had a problem and he hung it around the outside and broke later. It was a very good move indeed. Where
yeah.
Hill's got a problem regardless. It was a very, very ballsy move and a very brave move by Taylor Smith for the lead.
Yeah, you thought at the time that Hill might have had a puncture, and I was like, I don't think so. He's going around the corners fairly well. It was straight line speed
Yeah.
that was the issue. But yeah, and then he just free fall through the field, wasn't it?
Yeah, next lap he got swallowed up on the straight. And then Sutton and Ingram. What's really weird is that with only 4 laps to go, I mean, Sutton was 7th or 8th. Ingram was like 14th or 15th with 4 laps to go. And you think, how? I was watching thinking, I know they finished first and third. How do they finish third and third? How do they get past so many cars? And Ingram made some very un-Ingram style moves through the complex where he was up on the grass. He was
Tucking up on that inside curb. He loved that move, didn't he?
making a bit of contact within the realms of fairness, but you don't normally see Tom make contact when he doesn't overtake. Generally, but I think he knew that Sutton was in front of him and he had to get as close to Ash Sutton as physically possible. And it was worth risking it because if he finished behind him too far, it's as good as not finishing at all. So he made some really measured but aggressive, ballsy moves. And it was nice to see that from Ingram because it's nice to see that he's got the whole copybook. I was slightly surprised that Sutton went for the move on Aaron Taylor Swift just because Taylor Swift has got slight reputation, is it fair to say, for hard racing. But to be fair, they both gave each other a lot of space, a lot of respect, and Sutton closed it off with 1 lap to go, which is it's a really nice setup move through the complex onto the main straight, onto the pit straight. Sorry, from 23rd to first, and from 21st with a spin to third. It is ridiculous. Yes, there's a safety car chucked in there. Yes, Nap is very good indeed. But look, this if you can't enjoy it, if you can't, and I get people are fans of different teams, and I get that people not everybody likes Sutton, not everybody likes Ingram, but if you can't appreciate that for how good a drive it was by both, then this sport isn't for you. There's no conspiracy here. There's no Gal wanting them to win races. That is just pure talent and two of the best drivers I think either of us have ever seen in our generations.
Yeah, I mean, if Gal was trying to script it, he wouldn't have had Sutton winning this race. He'd want to bring that title challenged right down to the final lap of the final race, like he's done many times before.
Allegedly.
Allegedly, yeah. Sorry,
No.
but yeah, it was a fantastic race, and to see those two drivers going as fast as they can and as they could. It was interesting. Did you see the Sutton interview afterwards about how grateful he was for having a full bar of hybrid? It's like, come on, stop teasing us. You were just quick.
Slip you that money later on for giving us the praise. But
yeah,
I really don't understand this whole conspiracy chatter, and it's getting more and more loud on Twitter about it. That there's no reason for the touring cars to fix it for Sutton to win, and there's no need for them to fix it for Sutton to win. Sutton has been quick in everything he's raced. I get why people don't like him, but he is a bloody good, fast driver. It's as simple as that. He would take wins in the Cupra. It's as simple as that. You
Yeah.
know, he wouldn't take a championship in the Cupra, I don't think, but he would take wins in the Cupra. He is just very, very good. As is Tom Ingram. They're just both phenomenal drivers. And yeah, if you can't enjoy it, I feel sorry for you because I came away from the stands shaking. Just what have I seen? What have I just watched? And the other thing for me as well is that when Sutton got to second, I looked at my dad and went, "He wins this. He wins this. Guaranteed, he wins it." Because you only have to give him
Yeah.
half a sniff, and he'll find a way.
Yeah, certainly. Shall we go through the final standings for race 2 then?
Yes, I think that pretty much sums up race 2 in a nutshell. So yeah, Ash Sutton won from Aaron Taylor Smith. Good to see the respect between those two in the paddock afterwards of Taylor Swift joking, "You've got loads of wins. Couldn't have had this one," which good to see. Good to see some good camaraderie. Tom Ingram made up the podium place third. Butcher, a good result for him in fourth. Adam Morgan, Andrew Watson, fifth and sixth. Really good result for Andrew Watson in the Jack Sears. Cookie seventh. Colin Turkington in eighth. Daniel Lloyd in ninth. Rowbottom in 10th, Ronan Pearson 11th, Creasy in 12th, Moffat in 13th, Collar got points of 14, and Dobble rounded off the top 15 in 15th. Big names to miss out on points if you like. Obviously, Jake Hill ended up finishing 20th, and that was pretty much his championship charge over. Tom Chilton disappointingly down in 16th. And they've also had George Gamble, Dan Camish, both miss out on points, and Bobby Thompson retired early on with a problem as well. Bobby Thompson got a black and orange flag in this race, having a window flapping open, which I think is ridiculous. But yeah, I don't see why that's a meatball flag. It's a piece of perspex. It's not going to do any damage, particularly as Gamble spent the entire race with his rear bumper flapping off. But fine.
I would also just like to get your quick view on Moffat indicating to the left to let both Sutton and Ingram through, because I know it's been a big talking point on social media.
He let both cars through. He didn't indicate for Ingram, but he pulled out of the way. Look, I don't like to see it because I think that you should race through positions. However, on the flip side, Moffat knew he was in a slower car, and what is the point in ruining his race by holding up two people that are coming through? And the thing with Sutton and Ingram, they're coming through one way or another. So you either make it easy. I don't like to see it because I think you should race. And I remember seeing, I think it was Andrew Jordan have a similar one when he came from the back of the field to very high up with cars literally moving off the racing line for him. But then again, I also get it. Everyone's got sponsors to please. What's better, letting someone come through or ending up getting into scrap with the championship leader or championship protagonist for no reason whatsoever? So, yeah. What's your thought?
I completely understand why he's done it. He doesn't want to get involved in that battle. It's like Max Verstappen recovering through the field, going past a Haas. They're in almost completely different postcodes when it comes to race speed. You might as well just let them through and go on and continue with trying to make your own race as best you can.
I'd agree if you had used anything other than a Haas, because Kevin Magnussen never lets people through without a little bit of a fight. But I get your point. I take your point.
Yeah. Oh dear. Right, we'll move on to race 3 then. So ball 12 was picked out by a Mr. Ash Sutton, which Ingram had mysteriously called once again in his post-race interview of race 2.
Another conspiracy online being that the whole barrel was number 12s, and that Sutton picked out two and then chose which one to show to the camera. It's all rubbish. Please calm down. It's not. It was funny the other year when Colin always got the benefit of it, but come on, it's not a conspiracy. The balls aren't hot. It's ping pong balls with a number drawn. It's not high tech. It's a touring car, so we don't do high tech. There's no way it's done.
I did love, and have you seen Creasy's interview on the grid?
No.
So Creasy was on pole. He finished 12th in race 2, and Louise went through a little interview with him. And apparently he'd been calling and messaging everyone else on the grid, going, "We're just going to take this calmly, aren't we? And we don't want anything major to happen." Sort of like trying to talk down the rest of the drivers that are around him. And to quote him, he was bricking it starting on pole.
It showed
and
at the start.
It did show, didn't it? Interestingly, Nick was also on the grid. And he is hoping to be back for next year, which will be interesting because we think there might have been bridges burned at Team Hard.
Further conspiracy, he was in the Napa garage this weekend, so he's obviously racing Napa next year, obviously.
Maybe he's just been invited to their hospitality because that's the only way he can get in.
Through invite, yes.
Yes. But yeah, Creasy had a poor start, which meant that Pearson led from row bottom, and then Turkington, who of course got a decent start, rear wheel drive, fully dry race this one. Butcher and Morgan had a coming together coming down that Wellington straight. Creasy was falling through the field at this point and got himself in the middle of a Morgan and Butcher sandwich. From the replays that I've seen, it looks as if Morgan moves over to me, moves over on Creasy, comes across the front of him, and then takes Butcher out as well.
The stewards agree with you because Morgan got a penalty and Crease didn't. So
Okay.
the stewards agree with
Yeah.
you. What I'm most surprised about is that Morgan hits the wall. Okay, not quite full on, but then recovers and finishes 10th. I've never seen
That's a
anything like that
strong
before.
car.
Yeah,
it it was a sizable hit, but I think it was rear end for him. Whereas Butcher was out on the spot.
he wasn't happy.
Yeah, no, he's an angry Scottish man. Of course he wasn't. But yeah, that brought out the safety car to get Butcher's car recovered. And as you say, Morgan had dropped all the way back down to the back of the field and then had an excellent recovery drive through, which kind of went unnoticed until the final laps. Pearson was forced wide by Rowbottom before the safety car as well, coming out of Luffield. Again, one of those Rubbins racing, put him out on the edge of the gravel just to get the momentum as he came across the line. And by the time that safety car came out at the end of lap one, Ingram and Sutton were up 4 places each, with Hill also up to 15th from, I think, 20th. So all three protagonists were making progress. Morgan, as I said, was still running at this point and was going to make the best effort to try and get back through the field. And then on lap 9, Turkington managed to take row bottom and almost saunter off into the sunset. He got a fairly good, comfortable lead and looked unchallenged basically for the rest of the race. Ingram managed to get himself up to third quite comfortably, with Sutton basically ghosting him every time he made up a position. Sutton would then make up a position, and I don't think there were ever more than 2 places between them. It felt like for the whole weekend, just because they need to stick to each other like glue and mirror their performances. Collard was moving well through the field. He was up 7 places by the end of lap 13 and had one of his better drives of the weekend. He was fairly. I didn't even realise he was there for race 1 and 2. For most of the Toyota team, actually, this weekend, it was quite a letdown. Kreese managed to drop to the back of the field eventually on lap 13 and eventually went into the pits with a problem. So that was unfortunate with him starting on his first pole position, not able to get any sort of points out of it at all.
Team hard with mechanical problems.
Yeah, who'd have thought that? Ingram managed to get second coming over the line away from row bottom. Is a really nice move, tucked up the inside and just out dragged him down to Cops. And then we thought that Rowbottom was automatically going to let Sutton through, like almost straight away to try and go and have a go at Ingram. But it looked like a battle, and from what they said afterwards, Sutton didn't want to keep on taking and taking and taking. Obviously, Rowbottom had come to the end of his lap in qualifying and given it up so Sutton could stay in the top 10. He's given him many places across the season as well and let him through very easily, being a very, very good team player, to be fair.
Yeah, I mean, Sutton said afterwards that he accepts he doesn't need the points, which is an indication that I think everyone knows the championship is done, and he was happy to race
Yeah.
for position. I'd believe that slightly more had Rowbottom not decided to pull off to Towster to allow Sutton through with a couple of laps to go. It wasn't an overtake; it was clearly let through. But look, equally, that Rowbottom has to accept. I think that he's not in the championship hunt. And actually, the sooner Sutton wins it, the more likely Rowbottom will be allowed to keep these positions anyway. So let Sutton win it, and then try and win. Do your own stuff at Brands Hatch. But equally, Rowbottom is pretty secure at the team with the funding he brings. He's had a pretty solid season. Why do anything to upset the apple cart? Sutton is going to win the championship. He's your teammate. You can't win the championship. What really is a podium?
Well, yeah, maybe he missed a gear again just at Croft, like at Croft.
Yeah. Look, I mean,
Yeah.
this isn't taking away a rookie's podium at his home race, is it? So it's not quite as bad as what's happened across the garage. So
So yeah, with 3 laps to go, Sutton did manage to get through eventually up to third and was keeping tabs on Ingram a couple of seconds in front of him. Hill was up to eighth with 2 laps left, and Camish went off at Cops onto the final lap. A weekend to forget for him. Looked like possibly another puncture, or certainly the car
tyre failure. Yeah.
breaking breaking down on him. But Turkington would go on to take BMW's 150th win in the sport. And Morgan managed to get up to 10th after that off on lap one. But with the championship being that Sutton would lead by 45 points going into Brands Hatch.
Yeah, he's basically won it, given that there's
Big margin.
66 points available.
Yeah.
It's going to take a miracle at this stage. It's going to take Ash Sutton not turning up, and even then, I wouldn't necessarily think Ingram was guaranteed. So
Yeah. So to run through the race results of race 3, then Turkington won from Ingram, Sutton, Rowbottom. Pearson had a very good 5th position finish. Josh Cook in 6th. Collard managed to get all the way up to 7th, followed by Jake Hill in 8th. Taylor Smith sort of like secured his really solid weekend with a 9th position finish from that reverse grid. Morgan in 10th. Dan Lloyd 11th. Moffat 12th. Jelly 13th. His first points of the weekend in what was a pretty poor weekend for him. Doble finished 14th and Gamble in 15th. Patterson just missing out in 16th.
right, should we have a look at our awards?
Awards.
We
Awards,
do
yes.
we do we do predictions in the driver grades, don't we? Yes. I should know
Yes,
this by
yes.
now. It's only the 9th review of the season, but yeah. Go on then.
Yep.
Who was your driver of the weekend? We both agree on this. So give your spiel, and I'll add something if I can.
Yeah, my driver of the weekend. I thought about possibly Sutton for that race 2 performance because it was just that good, but he made the wrong decision in race 1 tyres. So for me, it has to be Aaron Taylor Smith. Stuck to those slick tyres in race 1, made good progress, pretty much mirroring Butcher coming through all those wet runners, and then probably should have taken the win in race 2, although beaten by the better man, and then secured his very good weekend, as I say, with a 9th in race 3.
Yeah, I mean, to add to that, Sutton was lucky to get through qualifying, whereas Taylor Swift wasn't. And
Yep.
Sutton seemed to lack pace in quali, and we'll never know what would have happened in race 1. But yeah, Taylor
Mm.
Swift got everything right this weekend, as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, he's had a really strong season, particularly the
Yes.
second half of the season. And PMR have done wonders with that car and that team, and it's really nice to see him at the front of the grid and battling. To be honest with you, so I've gone for
Yeah.
Taylor Swift as well. 3 points finishes and another podium. If you, I think they've now had what 5, 6 podiums this year, PMR, which I would
Mm.
never ever have thought coming into the season. So
No,
fair play. I think they've got more podiums than both One Motorsport and Toyota
probably
this season.
Toyota. Yeah,
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 yeah. So they're probably the 4th on the grid in terms of podiums this season, behind
yeah.
Bristol Street, Bristol Street, BMW, and Napa. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's pretty good, isn't it?
Your villain this weekend.
It's Camish. It's not all his fault. The car hasn't worked, but I think it's just a reflection of how disappointing Camish's time at Napa has been. To be honest with you, he was, I wouldn't say poor last year, but he was some way off Sutton last year. He's even further off Sutton this year, I think. And he can't have the excuse of it's a new car or anything like that. And this weekend just sort of confounded the difficulties he's had this season.
I know
Yeah,
he's had a couple of punches this weekend, but do you think any of the car gremlins have been as a result of that big shunt at Donington?
no, because they were running the spare shell this weekend. They weren't running the one they fixed from
Mm,
Donington, so no.
fair enough. Let's debunked that thought then.
But the line that I understood was that they fixed the car from Donington, but they weren't happy with it. I.e., either that it was
Okay,
back up to racing standard or it was back up to full safety standard. So they ran the spare shell this weekend.
that's fair enough. Um, you're going to be slightly confused by this one, but my
Yeah, I am.
villain this weekend is hybrid,
Go
and
on.
that is because so Sutton reckons that a lot of his speed in race 2 came because he had that full load of hybrid. But why is he so bloody quick everywhere else anyway? I honestly think that if he didn't have any hybrid for that race, he'd have probably still have won it anyway. And the same for Ingram getting up to the podium.
Well, I
I
agree with you.
really go on.
I agree with you because Jake Hill was winning the race comfortably with less hybrid in race 2 because of where he finished in race
Yeah,
1, and he was without the safety car. He wasn't being caught. Without the safety car on the
no,
issue, he wasn't being caught. So I would agree with you
yeah.
that you know, yeah,
So I I don't think hybrid made that difference in race 2. I think we need a massive overhaul from it, and a weekend like we've had. I think on a small circuit like that, it should make a much bigger difference.
mm,
Okay, Dobble took a pole position with maximum amount of hybrid, but the other drivers that were in the top 6 or 7 all had very minimal amounts. And we need to see a much bigger either power output or, well, I think both actually, a power output and range between what the drivers get to use. Whether it's a timed range, I think would be better than a laps thing, because having less time on each lap to be able to use it, I think will have a bigger effect rather than having less laps to use it in. It could even be the possibility that you look at both of those to try and make that big difference, like we saw when you add ballast and add that almost dragging weight, basically. Um, but I really think this weekend was the big show of how ineffective it is.
I wouldn't disagree. I wouldn't
So
disagree.
that's why I'm going for villain for hybrid this weekend. Because yeah, Camage had a bad weekend, but I think that was mainly down to the car, and he got unlucky with punches. Apart from that, I didn't think there were too many catastrophic performances.
Fair enough. Well, who was your surprise good of the weekend?
My surprise good of the weekend is a team, and that team is PMR. That Astra is really, really quick at times. Doesn't suit every circuit, certainly doesn't suit every circuit, but the circuits that it does suit, as we saw, it goes really well, and it goes well enough to challenge those top 3 teams.
Yeah, and they certainly capitalise on it when it does work. They certainly,
Yeah,
yeah,
massively.
yeah, absolutely. I'd agree with that. Mine's quite a interesting one. I'm actually going Silverstone as a surprise. Good.
Okay.
Now, look, on the preview, I did it down. I wasn't particularly excited. It actually
Yeah.
produced one of the best racing of the year. Yes, the weather helped that, but um, it was a lot more exciting than I expected it to be. And as a fan, there was a lot to do this weekend and a lot of stuff that I've not seen for the rest of the year. So Draper Tools had a tent and was running a free competition.
Mhm.
Bristol Street Motors have free racing sims. There was a lot of stands I've not seen before. More freebies. I got my BMW flag, which is kind of cool. When you're trying to build a podcast room ready for next year, this sort of stuff is kind of cool.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, there was it felt good this weekend. It felt like a touring car event rather than some of the other events I've been to this year, where it's kind of been we're here almost out of because we have to be rather than because we want to be.
Yeah.
It did feel like a proper sort of touring car event, like we used to go to as kids, where you got the
Load of
where you got the
freebies.
freebies. Yeah, and yeah, you want freebies. And actually, I like this sort of stuff by Napa. Are doing a few things at
Mm.
different races to make things a little bit more collectible. Hard have done it with their poster this weekend. I think that's a really nice, cool poster to
Yeah.
as a collector's item. Really like that. I think that teams that are doing Jake Hill had a really nice poster this weekend as well, which I didn't get, but Dad got for my sister. But yeah, it's the little touches like that which I think are really helpful. And the Bristol Street Motors fan
Garage.
zone, garage or fan zone are brilliant.
Yeah.
And BMW had got like a little walkway so you could go into the garages and
Mm.
without having to pay for that experience. I thought that was little stuff like that is what
Yeah.
we need to see throughout the season, particularly next year.
Here's a question for you then.
Mhm.
Was it worth the 40 quid ticket?
Yeah, I think it probably was. I didn't get to see a lot of racing because Dad has a tendency not to want to sit still, bless him. So we ended up doing a lot of walking.
He likes those
But
freebies, doesn't he?
he does like a freebie. But yeah, it's well set out. The paddock is really big, which is good. We saw quite a few people in there, Barry Plough and Matt Neal, all willing to have chat with fans and stuff like that. It felt like a proper touring car event. I still don't think it's. Look, I still don't think they should be charging 40 quid to go and see touring cars, because if you've got a family, you want to make it a family friendly sport. And I know kids go under a certain age go free, but if you've got two parents, two teenagers, that's
20.
120. No, four times six, four times four. Oh yeah, that is no 160. Four times four,
Oh yeah, sorry.
160 quid.
Yeah.
So
Plus
I,
any food you might have on the day and drinks, and
yeah,
it's a
so
very expensive day out.
I don't think 40 quid's right, but then it's Silverstone, it's the national circuit, it's it's the prestige of being Silverstone, but and everything's expensive. Yeah, it's not just Silverstone. Knock Hill was pretty expensive, to be fair. I think it was only 2 quid cheaper, and I think that was 38 quid. So um, you get a lot. You get a lot to do on the day, but I still don't like it being 40 quid. But yeah,
Okay. Who was your bad surprise of the weekend?
Ricky Collard, not just got tipped him for a win, but the Toyota has historically gone well here, and he was, I'd say, it's probably the weakest weekend of the season for him. To be honest
Yeah.
with you, he was very anonymous, didn't seem to have any pace, missed out the top 10 quali. Yeah, just not where I expected him to be.
Uh, Mine is along the same sort of lines. I'm actually going to change it from what I told you before the pod. I'm actually going to go for Gamble.
Yeah,
As you say, we expected big things from Toyota this weekend, and I thought, as with our predictions, that they were all going to get inside the top 10, and it was only Gamble that missed out on that. Yes, the other two weren't great, but at least Butcher and Collard got within the top 7 for one of the races. Whereas Gamble was always loitering down towards the bottom end of the points, which it hasn't been a great season from him. And I think he
right.
needs to pick it up if he wants to be there next year.
Yeah, I don't think he will be, but there we go. Well, that's for another day.
Yeah, plenty of rumours surrounding that towards the end of the season, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Do you have any final thoughts then as we wrap up the Silverstone review?
I think, as I said in the preview, the gap now is going to be too big
Yeah, it
to
is.
overcome, and Sutton is more than a worthy champion elect. Race 2 this weekend was the best race of the season, easily. To see Ingram and Sutton race through the grid like they did was just awesome to see, even from the sofa. Um, so, yeah, going into Brands, I'm kind of looking forward for the season to come to an end, because I like the off season. I like the rumor mill that starts once the final race finishes, as to where drivers are going to be, how many drivers we're going to have on the grid. And one other thing that I'd like to mention is, I don't know whether anyone else saw it, but the Steve Ryder and Alan Gow interview. I don't know whether it was included in the coverage this weekend or whether it was just a separate one for social media. But he looks like he's going to be fairly happy, even if we lose 3 or 4 TOCA licenses. It sounds like his ideal number is 22, 24 cars, and I can kind of understand that.
I think that we've seen a bit of a circus this year with teams running beyond their means, and that's not
Yeah,
just hard. I'd argue that Toyota really struggled with 3 cars. If I'm being honest with you,
yeah,
I think the only team that took on extra licenses and have done really well is PMR. If I'm being
yeah.
perfectly frank, I think One Motorsport struggled with 3.
Mm.
So yeah, the only problem with that is that Bristol Street Motors are looking at 6 next year, so you're going to have again 6, 4, and 4, which I think is I don't like.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah. We'll come on to that when the rumours are clearer. I'm going to ask you one more question as my final thought before we wrap up. When
Go on then.
Sutton wins his 4th title next weekend,
Mm.
um, does he go down as the GOAT? He's won a minute now. The reason I think the question has to be asked is
Because he's done it in several different cars over a shorter time.
that yeah, he's not got the record. The record is Rouse with 5. But obviously in a
No,
completely
Rouse
different.
has 4, same as Turkington.
Was it fourth? We had 5.
No, he has 4. Anyone
Okay.
to get that 5th will be the record holder.
Okay. Fine.
So
So
I don't think it will be too long till Sutton probably takes that, which will make it kind of undisputed. The only thing that I know certainly old school people will look at and say is, oh, but he hasn't got anywhere close to Plato's wins. He could.
yet, yeah,
Quite
yet.
simply, he could. And
Sutton
if you go
is
off points totals and podiums and stuff like that, if he wants to stay in the sport, and even if he changes from team to team, we've seen how well he can adapt. There's no question that he could quite easily take home 1 or 2 or even 3 more titles.
Sutton is 29, I think, which means he's probably got another 10 years at the top of the sport if he wants to.
Exactly.
So yeah, that Plato win record will go if he stays in the sport.
Yeah.
I think if when he wins his 4th next weekend, for me he goes down as the GOAT. I know people don't necessarily like those sort of conversations, but he's come in and won 4 in a very short time in 4 different cars, which I think is incredible.
Yeah.
It's 4 different cars, isn't it? Yeah, the Infiniti, the Subaru, the Ford, and
He won 2 in the Infiniti.
2 in the Infiniti. Apologies, in 3
Yeah.
different cars. Then in 3 cars that are really weird in terms of you wouldn't expect them to win championships. Certainly not the Subaru or the Infiniti. Maybe a bit more so the Ford, but um, yeah, and the way he's done it is in such an explosive manner, and actually in such a dominant manner, because he's not won them closely; he's won them by quite a distance.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
And
been relatively comfortable.
and in that he's had to beat 4-time champion Colin Turkington and Tom Ingram, who is easily as good as Sutton. But I think that's what makes it even more special, is that he's had to beat a really strong field, and I would argue that particularly one of Collins. It's not just me bashing Colin, but one of Collins was quite easy in terms of it was a small field and a particularly poor field.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what other drivers obviously come through in the next couple of seasons, and how well other teams develop as well, and what cars are brought to the table across the next couple of years. Because I think there needs to be a shake up of that sooner rather than later, because we all like a bit of newness sometimes, don't we?
I love a bit of Nunez. He scored a good goal at the weekend.
Newness. Oh, dearie me. Right. We will be back once again with our grades for the drivers from this weekend, along with our predictions. And then we're having a small little holiday to Spain.
We
But
are.
don't worry, we will be back just in time for the final weekend at Brands Hatch. The preview for that will be out on the Friday evening, and we will be watching from home.
Bye.
Bye.